Hello, welcome back to the Female Guides Requested podcast, and happy Wednesday. This is your host Ting Ting, and I'm back to sunny Las Vegas. Today in episode 13, our guest is Crystal Hudelson. I have adored Crystal's work and efforts towards creating space for climbers of color. This past summer, I was excited to work for the organization Climbers of Color, in which she had put her heart and soul, and of course, I couldn't miss the chance to meet her and interview her. Crystal is a second-generation Haitian American and of Irish descent. She lives in Seattle, Washington, with her life partner Keith, who also adores climbing and traveling. She currently gives most of her DEIJ time in climbing to an affinity group in Washington called Climbers of Color. DEIJ means diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. Crystal and her partner developed the rock instruction curriculum, and she serves as director of rock instruction, rock guide, and in any other capacity the organization requires. Through her work with COC, she hopes to encourage climbers to become and continue to be leaders in their communities while bringing multiple perspectives into the sport of climbing. In this episode, we talked about why and how she devoted herself to affinity work, where we can find resources to better our cultural competency, her dreams to help climbing instructors to not only provide instruction, but also know how to provide space for participants of different backgrounds. I asked about her proudest moment and what she hoped listeners would take away from this episode. Her answers were thoughtful and beautiful. I can't wait to share this episode with you all. Now, please enjoy. We can start.
Okay.
Yeah. Hi, Crystal.
Hi, Ting Ting.
Yes. Welcome to the show. I'm pretty excited to have you. Can you pronounce your last name again for me?
Yes, Hudelson.
Hudelson. Okay. I know that we know each other because of Climbers of Color, based in Washington or
Yes.
Seattle?
Seattle.
Okay.
Western Washington.
Yeah. Can you describe a little bit about Climbers of Color? And were you the one who started this organization?
So, Climbers of Color has been going strong since 2017.
2017.
Yes.
Wow, 6 years.
Yes. The rock side is not that old. Originally, it was founded by Mariko Ching, Don Wen, and two other people who are not involved anymore, right?
And they were in Seattle?
They're in Seattle.
I see.
Yes.
So the whole thing started in Seattle?
Yes, correct. And so the mountaineering programs have been going since about 2017, 2018, right? Outdoor mountaineering. And then they started adding people of color climb nights to the gyms in 2019. And that's when Keith and I, my partner Keith and I, started becoming involved. We went to a climb night and Mariko was like, hey, do you want to start a climb night at your home gym? And at the time we liked to go to, it's now Edgeworks Bellevue. At the time it was Stone Gardens. And so we started hosting there. It became apparent that we were very organized. We were very experienced in especially outdoor climbing. Don't get me wrong, we were recreationalists for sure, not guides at the time. And so Dawn and Mariko were like, hey, would you like to develop this branch, this rock climbing instruction branch for Climbers of Color? So I believe it was end of 2019. Keith and I took the SPI course, the single pitch instructor course, and we didn't really know what we were getting into, and it just went from there. We built the entire rock instruction program side of Climbers of Color from 2019 on, but we started offering programs in 2020.
That's cool. So let me summarize it. So you have a mountaineering sector.
Yes.
And then you have a rock climbing, more focus on rock
Yes.
sector. And then you also have volunteers to run climb nights in maybe local gyms, say in the big Seattle area.
Yes. Well, we span anywhere from, I believe we are working on climb night up in Bellingham, which is up north, all the way down to Tacoma and even west over in Bremerton area as well. So we've expanded quite a bit over the years. Yeah.
I see. And then those original two, sorry, can you repeat their names too?
Don Wen
and
Mariko Ching.
Mariko Chin.
Mariko, yeah.
And they are still running mountaineering programs?
They are still part of the organization. Mariko has transferred from director of operations to a board member, so they're still involved with a lot of the important aspects of the organization, right, when we have board meetings. Don Wen is currently the director of mountaineering as well, and he's been guiding and doing that entire thing since 2017 and 2018. Yeah.
I see. And then you and Keith were mainly directing the rock program.
Yes, we are not mountaineers. Keith likes to say if there is ice is actually for drinks, not for climbing.
Okay.
So if it's snow involved, we really don't do it anymore.
Well, I mean, I jokingly say because I mostly guide on rock too, so I say with the climate change, we probably don't need to learn how to climb ice because it'll be gone
right?
soon.
That's terrible.
I know it's terrible, but yeah, but it could happen. I don't know in the foreseeing future.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I know you're not full-time guide,
No, not
right?
by any
you're,
means.
You're part-time guide.
Correct.
So, how did you get involved into all these things that say, what's your, well, I like to call it anchor job, which you make the most income from?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so what do you do for...
I'm actually an aircraft mechanic. I specialize in electrical and electronic systems. So I used to work directly on the aircraft, and since I've been kind of promoted to a bench job where I actually refurbish parts for the aircraft. But essentially I'm breaking down components and looking at wiring diagrams and schematics and resoldering things on circuit boards, etc. Which I prefer because I was working graveyard the last 7 years that I worked as an aircraft mechanic. But that's my anchor job, right? So it has allowed me a lot of resources, right? I do recognize that. It's also allowed me a lot of time to invest in my own climbing. Same with my partner. You know, we just went around and did a bunch of climbing and traveling and just was everything climbing, right? But we always felt like we wanted to give back to the community and help build a community specifically here in Seattle. My partner and I both do identify as Black climbers, right? And there's not a lot of POC climbers in general in the Seattle area, more than there used to be, quite a bit more, from my personal observations. But when we took the SPI course, like I said, we didn't know what we were getting into. It was the first time I had ever seen an extended anchor, and I was like, what is this? Why would I use this again? And of course, the instructor graciously was like, well, you know, as a recreationalist, you probably won't use this unless you're climbing somewhere on the East Coast where you have to set the extended anchors to do your top rope, etc. And even that's kind of obscure, right? So it was things that I had never seen before, but we were excited to learn them because it was kind of required. And I say kind of because scope of practice hadn't come into the picture yet. So Keith and I had our SPI course and we were allowed to start teaching, whereas now you have to actually be certified to teach, right? Single pitch.
Yes and no, I guess. Because my understanding is that scope of practice only if you teach for money, then you do.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then if you do mostly volunteer work, then you can do a lot of things.
Oh, interesting. The way that we're structured with the guiding company partners that we had started to hold us accountable to scope of practice.
Okay.
Which is a whole nother thing that we've gone around and around with, right? Because we do have our own in-house training that we have developed over the last couple years since having built the rock instruction side as well. But to get back to your original question, one day Mariko was just like, hey, you could get paid to help develop this and help bring in more climbers of color into rock climbing. And I was like, that actually sounds like something that Keith and I have been looking for to want to do, right? And so that's kind of how we got into it.
I see.
We just fell into it. Didn't know what it was.
So then that's the reason that you took the SPI, was that right?
Yes.
Okay. Let me try to ask. So I know that in Seattle area, there's this organization called the Mountaineer.
Yes.
Who has been operating for a long time.
Long time.
And then their structure is, it seems that it will be senior members that goes to also their in-house training and then give lessons to the younger or newer members.
Sure.
Is Climbers Color like similar in that model, or is kind of a little bit different because you also work with guide services?
So we are kind of a standalone entity. We're actually fiscally sponsored by the Mountaineers. They've been really gracious with their resources, time, etc. But we run our own things. We're an independent organization, if you will. Even with the guiding companies, they've been gracious enough to let us run our own programming, and they've been really good partners in that sense, right? We do actually have a couple programs, and I'm only going to speak specifically for rock because I don't want to speak for other branches, because that's the one I'm most closely involved with. So we have two things that have come down the pipeline that we started to quickly recognize needed to be implemented in place to kind of build upon the skills of the current people of color that actually guide in the area or are looking to guide, right? So we have the single pitch instructor partners, what we call it. And we take people that have the skills that are either that they've got from the SPI course or that they have actually had themselves, right? That skill level of trad, being able to maybe possibly have an interest in teaching these things, being able to lead, etc. And they go through an entire season shadowing one of our guides to learn how to teach, and of course how to teach people of color. Not to say that it's different, but there are nuances, right, when you're teaching for affinity groups that we need to be aware of, that I think everyone should be aware of. And after that, if they feel like they're ready, and we feel like they're ready, we'll hire them on as a guide to teach seasonally for us as well, right? That's kind of a mentorship for getting people to go through the SPI course, or at least have skills at that level, because we are held to scope of practice, right? You have to be SPI certified in order to teach by yourself. The other program that is actually new this year is what we call the multi-pitch instructor partner. And that's where we actually take people that have a skill level to where they're either going to take the rock guide course or have taken the rock guide course, because then you're aching into teaching multi-pitch, right? Because after you've taken that, you're allowed to teach multi-pitch, and there's more nuances that come with that as well. So we're very happy to have made it to this mentoring level, right, of being able to say, yes, we're going to prep you for the 50-minute rock rescue drill that you will see in the rock guide course, but eventually have to take later on down the line. And I can tell you, Ting Ting, if I had these resources and knew kind of what I was getting into before I took the SPI course, before I took the SPI exam, before I took the rock guide course, I would have felt that much more prepared and probably more comfortable and confident in my abilities. When I saw the rock rescue drill for the first time, I was just like, what is this? Why do I need it? And why should I care, right? But it's skills that you kind of need when you're doing multi-pitch stuff, and I totally recognize that. But just being exposed to this stuff, bringing people in just so that they can actually see it and be familiar with it before they're getting thrown into this course, especially for people of color who feel like they need to be 110%, 120% before they actually take a course that they're learning in. It's not a test, they're learning. But I think I digress. Yes.
Let me ask this question.
Yes.
So at the very beginning, it was young. So obviously you need to pull outside resources, for example, like Mountaineers or like some help from the existing guiding services. But then perhaps your goal is that eventually then you will develop enough, say, human resources, then you can run your own programming and also mentor newer guys.
Oh no, we've been doing that.
Yeah, okay.
The last couple of years.
Right.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to say is because the way that you start is a little bit different than what, not saying I'm pretty familiar how a guiding service is run, but we all talk about, say, the insurance and permits,
Right.
and then those business stuff, because originally they are designed to do it for profit.
Correct.
Right. But then the mission of Climate Scholar is a little bit different. But right now, yes, there's commercial activity involved. So there's also the SOP is kind of getting there too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then obviously you want to, not just like a volunteer, you want to be a professional level. So that's kind of a necessary step for the Climate Scholars to take.
Absolutely. So, especially since we're a people of color participant and led group, which means that we do need guides that are competent to be able to lead other people of color out in the field. So we do want professionals, right? We do want to build up their skill level as well. And fortunately and unfortunately, we have had this support so that we didn't have to focus on more of the business model, and I say quote unquote because we are a nonprofit, obviously, due to our partnerships. But in a way, it has also made it so we are going to have to enter that realm at some point. We don't operate on our own insurance. We don't operate on our own permits. And that's a whole nother world that takes time, money, effort, energy, resources, right? So I think that would be a huge goal of ours as well, is to have our own insurance and permits. Not to say that we don't value our current partnerships. We absolutely do. But in order for us to fully fulfill our mission, then I think it's going to have to come down to that at some point.
Yeah, I will agree. Then, because you would say from baby to teenager, and then you're adult, and you're gonna come out for your own,
Definitely.
do your own thing. And then you were talking about your in-house training, and specific that you train the guys or aspirant guys in order to lead groups of climbers of colors.
Yeah.
What are those nuances that you were talking about?
So I think the biggest example that I can give is I gave a talk at the Mountaineers, done by climbers of color. We have these sessions called A Seat at the Table, where we actually bring in people to talk about certain topics. And I was one of those people that actually made this program, and then I was lucky enough to be able to talk on this subject. And I gave a talk that was called an outdoor industry's guide to the inclusion of Black people, right? So the interesting thing is, though I am Black, I don't speak for all Black people, right? I don't speak of all people of color as well, because I don't represent every single demographic. So really in that instance, I really took my experiences and what makes me feel comfortable and what makes me feel included, and like I actually want to continue in the community and try to impart that knowledge upon other people, right? So the specific training that we give at Climbers of Color, we give what we call holding space training, where we try to impart empathetic tools, so that we're like, have you had an experience similar to this in the past where you felt not included, where you felt kind of othered, right? And flexing that empathetic muscle to be like, how can I take a step further outside of myself and now help this person to feel included, because I know what that feels like and I want to eradicate that, right? And so most of the talks that we have are based around that. So first we start with what we call DEIJ based training. We bring in a consultant who comes in and kind of lays the foundation for like different pronouns.
And then so DEIJ is diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice.
Justice, correct. Yes,
Okay,
which
great.
is a big piece of it as well. And so laying the foundation for that first before you can then turn to empathy, because like you just said, DEIJ, what is that, right? What is LGBTQIA2S+? What is that? Etc. And so being able to define some of these terms and then talk through certain situations is a big part of that too. And I think it's a piece that a lot of affinity groups may not have, just simply because they don't have the resources or the time, or maybe even, I'll venture to guess, some of them just don't even think they need this type of thing, right? But even within people of color communities, there's always conflicts too. And so us being able to understand one another and hold space for another and be empathetic to one another, I think is a huge tool, even in guiding and outside of guiding, right? And so a lot of that training is focused in on that. And I would love to add like some conflict resolution tools in there as well, because it's hard, right? Doing this affinity work is really difficult. It takes work, it takes education, it takes time and effort and a lot of emotion.
So when you say like some conflicts, is there any like example that you
Yes,
can...
I have.
Okay.
I have an example. Yes, at the time of this podcast right now, it has actually not been released yet, but there's going to be a statement from a queer-led group in Seattle that decided to plagiarize an application from Climbers of Color without consent, and it hurt. It really hurt. It is a group that Climbers of Color, we kind of opened our doors and we were like, yes, you're starting climb nights. Let's host together for QTPOC. Let's do these things, you know. And for some reason, they took our kindness and our openness as an open invitation to take anything that was public on our website.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but plagiarism is something that we're taught in schools not to do, right?
Because...
Don't copy and paste. If you do...
Right.
You're going to say where you got it from. They didn't either. And so we were very confused and very hurt about this. And conflict can cause people to do a couple things. You go into fight or flight mode, right? You can fight them, you can flight, and you can just be like, you're cut off, we're done. We don't want to be like that, right? We want to understand where they're coming from. We want to understand why they did what they did. And we want to continue to work with them, because division is not the main goal. Division will get us back to square one.
True.
Right?
Yes.
We need to work together. And so we sat down, we're like, look, this is what we need from you in order for us to feel seen, validated, and supported, right? And this is how we're going to define our relationship later on, right? Because we want to continue to work with you, and we value what you're doing, because we are stronger together for sure. I will say that specific example came to mind because it's current. It may not be POC specific, but it's affinity specific, right? They do have POC, people of color, in their organizations, but it is a white-led organization. And I think that's an important fact to also distinguish in how that plays out and feels for the people of color whose work had been put into that application, for sure.
Whew.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot.
I know. I hate conflicts, but sometimes definitely you need to resolve those in order to get stronger, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, we both are like climbers of colors, and well, I should not speak for you, but I certainly recognize the importance of being like inclusive.
Sure.
And I know that in the guiding industry, the more traditional, I don't know what I should call it, but
historic.
Okay. Yeah.
Historically.
Well, many people recognize this important work. Some people don't feel that way. But right now, say, what we're talking about SPI, Single Pitch Instructor, which is the AMGA program, American Mountain Guides Association. And as far as I know, that there's really no official educational component to, say, help guides, existing guides, to be more inclusive.
Sure.
So what do you think that, say, if, say, cisgender white guys, actually even me, I should not say that I don't need those things, they want to be a little bit more culture aware. So because the climbing community is growing, so at some point you're gonna meet people that's from different than your culture. Actually, I meet them all the time.
Nice.
So because white people, different culture than mine, but
yeah.
Where can they find these resources to help themselves and then help with their job?
That's a really good question. I'd say that the first parameter is to give a damn. Can I cuss on here?
Yeah,
They
sure.
have to give a damn, right?
Okay.
Like a lot of companies will be like, okay, we're gonna have this diversity, or what's that word that they use for tolerance training, which I've never loved that
Tolerance
specific
training. Okay.
word. Yeah, tolerance, having tolerance for other like cultures and stuff. But to me, that sets a precedence of negativity, personally. But it's an interesting thing, right? You have to, again, be empathetic and be like, would I want this to be me? And I think a lot of people take for granted their privilege where they're like, oh, well, it never has to be me, right? And so giving a damn, of course, first and foremost. The next thing I would say is, and that's a tricky one, right? Because like, if you take Climbers of Color Instagram, for example, sometimes we do a lot of educational stuff on there, opinion pieces, etc., that are posted up in stories. And I'd say that's a really good place to get an education. Our people of color Instagrams or even just newsletters or whatever. However, it's a double-edged sword because Climbers of Color is a space for people of color. And sometimes we will have people that are not in those demographics come up and decide to assert themselves and their opinion, trying to get more of an education, right? We should absolutely, as people of color, not be the one doing the education unless, one, we're paid, and two, we volunteered to do so, right? Which is not a lot of the times the case, especially on social media. So it's a difficult thing, right? I feel like if you're actually paying attention, there's a lot of resources out there. There's books, there's Google. Google is fantastic, right? And free. Google is free. But if you did want an actual formalized education, I'm going to give a shameless plug here for the Outdoor Leadership Accelerator Program by Brenda Hollon. Brenda, Hollon. Here in Leavenworth. She's a long-term guide as well, and she has the foresight to say, okay, guides need this type of training, right? So the AMGA could very well contract with her company and be like, hey, can we offer this training for anyone who wants to go through it, right? And I believe it's a 12-week program, but it's specific days off and on, but you can find more information about it if you just Google OLAP Brenda Holland. And it's a fantastic program. It's a base that I truly believe anyone in the world walking around, not even just guiding, should probably have. But specifically, it's niche in that it does talk about how guiding kind of overlaps with that. It's a fantastic program. I went through it myself, and I think it's worth the time and money, and they do actually have scholarships as well.
Awesome. So since you have taken that, because a lot of time I think I'm making assumptions, but I'm assuming that some guys don't give a damn that.
We can assume that.
Okay.
Sure.
Because they think that for example, they might have enough clients or they would never operate within that space. Mm-hmm. So, or they claim that, climbing doesn't discriminate. So they think there's no benefit for them. Right. So they really want to see the benefit. Not just like, I do it for a good cause. Sometimes that reason alone is not gonna move people to take actions.
True.
So I'm curious, like, if you say the biggest benefit for taking the training, can you give me some sounds like maybe an incentive that I'm like, I can't wait to jump on this opportunity.
I don't know, to be a good person. That's it. That's always something I think a lot of people strive for. Mm-hmm. But for some reason, they don't include racial justice in that. And unfortunately, the way that the U.S. has been structured with redlining and segregated schools, etc., and I'm just going to use white folks for example, because they're, an easy example, have been segregated out, and it's systemic. It's the way our cities were built. It's the way that they have been insulated and not have that much contact with other cultures, right? That they think being a good person doesn't extend to racism, when in fact that racism is all around them and they don't even see it because of the entire systems around them. So if you want to truly be a good person, it's not going to cost you anything. I mean, it might cost you a little to OLAP, but it's a good cause for money to go to. But even just having the experience to see what it's all about and what is this DEIJ thing? Like, how can it benefit me? There's a book out there that's called, I think it's White Supremacy is Killing Us. Right. And that would be a really good place to start as well. Don't quote me on the book title, but I believe that it was White Supremacy is Killing Us.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm an immigrant, so I can't claim that I really understand. So I would go find a book. I'm still trying to understand the racism in the United States because I'm coming from, I grew up in Taiwan, and many people just look like me. So I never thought that would be a problem when I came to the States. But definitely... That remind me, say, I know that a lot of bigger companies, because all this, like, say, Black Lives Matter and all this movement and all these big events that's on the news, so they start to have cultural competency training within, like, for example, maybe in Seattle, all this tech company, Amazon, Facebook, Google, whatever, or Starbucks. Yeah. But there's, like, research showing that like some people are doing research to see whether it's actually be effective. Yeah. And
is it?
It turns out it's not super effective because...
Well, it's a captive audience, right? Okay. They're like, do this or your job. Like, again, you kind of have to give a damn still.
I think that's a very important thing because if you don't have the internal drive... then you just do it because my work requires me to do this training. It's probably not gonna be useful.
No, absolutely not. And the guides that we employ at Climbers of Color, they do give a damn. We have talked to them. We've interviewed for people to come in and join our team, and it's people that are passionate about this cause and passionate about having empathy for other people, and they really are invested in wanting to see the participants grow, right?
Yeah. And to write on that, you say, well, you don't know because just want to be a better person, be a good person. I know it's kind of abstract, but I think be nice and be a good person really have long-term benefit.
You think so?
I do.
Like what?
I don't know. I just think that I try to be nice and people seem to be nice to me.
That's always good.
All right. Yeah. So,
and can I say too, intent versus impact can also be different. You can still consider yourself to be a good person and the intent to be good, but then your impact to also have been negative. If we go back to my example of the plagiarism issue, right? The reason they took our application word for word, which had been honed for the last, 7 years, right? To make sure that we got the information that we wanted. We had the language exactly the way we wanted, and we edit it and hone it every single year and change it, is because they were running a QT POC scholarship, and they wanted to make sure they got the language right. And so their intent, right, was that they absolutely wanted to be inclusive and they wanted to make sure they felt people were seen and they were supported, right? But the impact on it was that they were stealing, if you will, work from a non-binary person of color and myself, a Black woman who had put work into that every single year to make sure that it was the best that it could be. So they're trying to be good people, right? But at the same time, their impact was very negative, and in my eyes, it was a mistake.
Right.
And not to say that I'm trying to just blanket be like, it was a mistake, we're done, it's over, the relationship's dead. No, right? People make mistakes all the time. Even in DEIJ, people have gone through the OLAP program, the Outdoor Leadership Accelerator program. They still make mistakes. And that's okay. The biggest part about making mistakes, though, is number one, owning up to it, right? Number two, apologizing if it's warranted, right? And if it's welcome. And number three, learning from it and moving on. And once you've learned from it and moved on, but carried that lesson with you, you can do better the next time.
So is this conflict resolved? Yeah, or is still ongoing?
I would say they've lost some trust. Absolutely. And so we've set some boundaries with them. We're like, look, instead of us just being like, hey, can I get this resource from you, eyes on it for free, because we have, offered them resources and time from our staff, they're going to have to go through a more formalized process. So we're not completely just like crucifying them, so to speak. We're just like, look, this is what you need to do to rectify this, and please, we're not like that anymore. We are not tight like that anymore. I'm sorry, but it just signaled to us that you're subscribing to a similar system of extraction of resources as the general population. So why would we continue to have this really informal relationship with you anymore? I think that we can learn things from each other and we can share resources, but at the same time, when you've stepped over a boundary like that, you cannot let that continue, right? But you can set boundaries while still having a healthy relationship with them and still having both parties benefit.
True. Wow. But even think about it, I was just like, wow, there's a lot of effort.
It is. Yes.
Going into the thing. And let's talk a little bit about your guiding.
Sure.
Like this season, what did you do? Just this season?
Just this season? Just my guiding or the organization of the guiding?
Let's say your guiding and then we can talk about the organization.
Okay, yes. This year I've taught Intro to Multi-Pitch, Anchors Cleaning and Repelling, which is one full focus clinic. I've also taught Intro to Trad. On top of that, I'm kind of our informal rock team instructor, so I'm teaching the single pitch instructor partners skills and then the nuances of how to teach, etc., and also the multi-pitch instructor partner as well. I feel like I'm missing one in there somewhere. I haven't taught sport or top rope this season. Last season I taught a bunch because we're still kind of building up our team, right? And I think we've gotten a lot more steam this year, and that next season I can guide even less. We're hoping, a sneak preview for y'all, to add rope rescue course as well, right? We do go a little bit over rescue scenarios and stuff in Intro to Multi-Pitch. Just some certain things like hauling, and being able to ascend back to your anchor, which I think are very, very important if you're going to be eking into multi-pitch. I don't know about you, but I was scared crapless when I first started multi-pitch because I didn't know how to get people up and I didn't know how to get myself back to an anchor if I passed it on rappelling, right? Also, I have shadowed for Climbers of Color's very first single pitch instructor course that you taught for us, actually, that was all by POC here in Washington. And that was really exciting, and thank you again so much for teaching that. The participants were all great, and it was just good feels all around, I think. And they really soaked up every single word you had to say, which was a lot of knowledge.
Oh, I'm flattered.
Of course.
Yeah. How about the program, though? So the program has grown a lot this year, right?
A little bit. Just the course list?
Just the organization.
Yeah, I'd say a little bit. Offering the SPI by POC course was a huge step, right? Also, there is a little bit of cohesion between the branches, whereas this year, we offered multi-pitch last year for the first time. So this is my second season teaching it, right? But it also means that if you go through everything from outdoor bouldering to top rope to anchors, cleaning, rappelling, sport leading, trad leading, and then up to multi-pitch, we can kick you out the door and be like, go try alpinism with our mountaineering, right? So we've essentially had this entire path, which I've had the pleasure, I'm tearing up a little bit, of seeing people go through this entire pipeline as a recreational climber, to have soaked up all this knowledge and skills to be able to get to their big objectives that they've wanted to tackle, but they just didn't have the skills to. So it's been a really beautiful thing watching that. So it has grown.
Do you think right now you have a healthy amount of instructors for the next year?
Oh no, we're always running at deficit.
Okay.
Always. And it these past 2 seasons, it's been me kind of substituting, and I know that can't continue, but And
was that your goal, though, to have enough
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. It wasn't my goal to substitute all the time.
Right.
Absolutely. We've grown every year. And it seems like some days it feels like kind of a revolving door because season to season people will be out with either like an injury or someone has moved to China, etc. Different things have had people come in and out. We have had people that have stayed multiple seasons, right? Which is really great. So we're still building our core crew. And that takes time, especially with all the trainings that we have. And it's essentially us as an organization building trust with these guides to be able to interact with our community, right? Not to say they're never going to make mistakes. Even I still make mistakes myself. But for them to know how to act appropriately to try to rectify any mistakes that they have made. We try to keep an open conversation with the BIPOC community that's like, hey, even though we're instructing you, we're not perfect. So if I make you feel uncomfortable in any way, please let me know and we will hash it out. We'll talk about it and I'll see if I can rectify my behavior. And I think that's really needed in any kind of instructor to participant relationship.
So you have this anchor job, aircraft mechanics.
Correct.
Okay. And you do mostly summer, I think, here in Seattle guiding.
Yes. Yeah.
And you also have some personal climbing. And then you also have to do all this organizational stuff within the organization.
Yes.
How do you manage your time and energy?
People talk about a work-life balance. It's not ever balanced. It's whatever you're putting your energies to in the moment. And for me, the last couple years has been all climbers of color for the most part.
So last 2 years has been really focusing on climbers of color.
Yeah, I'd say 3 years. Okay. Yeah, last 3 years. Because even before
including the pandemic year too?
Yes.
I see.
So funny thing is, we actually ran programs during the pandemic. We were very careful. It was all outdoor programming. Everyone was masked, even though we were outside.
I mean, summer 2020.
Summer 2020, yeah. And it was actually the most challenging year that I've ever run programs. It was our first time. We had the pandemic. We had fires that had smoke everywhere. We had to cancel things. Like, there were so many contingencies that I think it really tightened up our programming for the next couple of seasons. But it was hard. It was difficult. And especially since the POC population can be subject to certain situations in the health industry, with the fact that either they don't think that they're as sick as they are in the case of Black folks when they go to seek medical attention, etc. And that's a whole nother conversation. Then we decided to try to be extra careful. So we did actually cancel quite a lot, and we had no climb nights inside at all for, I think, about a year. It was really difficult.
And so continue on the work life.
Yes, so it's whatever's in the moment for me. And like I said, the moment is Climbers of Color. And it's practically like a second job for me. It really is. Yes. I don't actually get paid for it. I only get paid when I go out and instruct, and that's fine. That's the path that I've actually taken.
So you mean that with the organization work is more like volunteer?
It is all volunteer for me. Absolutely. We've grown to the point that we do have some staff we're able to provide stipends for, but I have not taken a stipend for my position of director of rock instruction. Yeah.
In that case, what's the vision though? I mean, as far as I know, there are a lot of, say, outdoor educators or guides that they start with this passion. And which is beautiful. But then at some point, maybe you will say, wow, I'm working a lot. I still have the passion, but certainly you might have other priorities. Then you start to face, oh, maybe I need to be compensated a bit more, or maybe I need to reduce my workload on this non-paid job, and yada yada, and all that. So what's your vision that I know that you're very passionate about it right now. So I'm just curious because I know that this year you hire a new person to take the director.
Yes. I'm letting go of our creation, which is hard.
Okay.
But at the same time, I totally trust. It's Sophia Petros, and
she's great.
Oh, wonderful. Sees the vision as well. The difference being that since we are an organization that has grown, we are going to be able to at least compensate them for their time, which is fantastic. But as far as the vision, I never saw myself doing this for more than a couple years, but as the demand has kind of grown for it, I've stuck with it, right? And I never thought I'd find someone that would be able and willing to take on all this work and be passionate and see eye to eye with what I have for a vision. And granted, that might change for them a little bit, and that's perfectly fine. Organizations should change with their vision, etc. But for me personally, I'm going to be stepping down as director as of 2024. Sophia Petros will be taking
So next
my
year
pot.
you won't be the...
No, I will not be the director. It's bittersweet, right? Because we are coming into our own. We're getting more resources. We're doing more programming, right? But at the same time, I am exhausted. And every single affinity group leader I talk to, they are exhausted as well. Like, it's just the name of the game, and it's really unfortunate because it means we're not fully validating ourselves and giving ourselves time and permission to develop like our own personal climbing. Like, I don't climb as hard as I did a couple years ago. I'll admit it. I'm more doing desk work now, which is hard. It's hard on the ego, right? It's hard because then you're like, oh, this was kind of like my form of, say, therapy or something. And you just don't have time for it. But I've chosen this path, and so it's a little bittersweet. But at the same time, I would like to be the person that teaches the people how to teach the participants, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense.
Great. So the goals that I have for myself personally, and I guess I haven't said it out loud that much to that many people, and one, I guess because I'm slightly afraid, and two, afraid that it might not happen or pan out, right? And two, I like a surprise element where I'm like, guess what, everyone? Yeah. But I'm actually taking my multi-pitch instructor course this September, so it's next month of 2023. And that will, after I've graduated from that, hopefully, that will put me on the path to be able to apply to possibly be an SPI provider, which I think would be phenomenal for the organization, right? So that we are able to train guides how we want them to be trained, and enter that conversation of that cycle of consent and conflict resolution, etc. And then just make it that much more accessible. Like, for example, the BIPOC SPI course that we ran this past, month, we were able to supply all gear for any participants that needed it. And I don't think AMGA courses do that. I have never seen them do that.
They bring their own gear.
Exactly. And I think that's just another level of barrier of entry, unfortunately, right? Not to say that they can't get their own gear and everything. Maybe they can't in the moment. Maybe they did like what I've done for years and just supplemented with my friends' trad racks, right? Maybe they're doing affinity work and they want to volunteer, etc. Anyways, we could go down that rabbit hole, but we won't. And so just running things a little bit differently. And I think SPI provider is another access of unlocked power in the guiding realm, right? And I would love to go down that path. I don't know if I have what it takes to be an SPI provider, but I'm going to put my name in the hat at some point.
I mean, if you need any help,
yeah,
feel free to let me know.
Thank you.
I'll see what I can help.
Thank you. That means the world to me, because just having the support and someone like you to be able to tap into for resources is really, really grateful for it. Thank you.
And then, I'm lonely.
Oh, are you? Oh. I know there's not that many female or trans or non-binary SPI providers. Do you know how many there are?
I do not. I will have to ask Andrew, who is managing the SPI and CWI programs, for the complete list.
I know that of one other person of color, woman of color.
Okay.
And then you, and that's all I know, actually.
Yeah, it's not that many that I can guarantee you. Yeah. Not that many.
Okay. Well, and the other thing is, and I think we've talked about this before, it's an immense privilege, but also an immense weight that I think I'll be the first Black woman.
Could be.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know Because
Yeah,
I don't have the stats in front
yeah,
of me.
exactly. Yeah, that. Well, and I don't know if the AMGA actually collects those stats. And so
Okay.
here is another issue that I'd like to talk about.
Okay.
You and I have talked about this because I think when we started talking about your podcast, I thanked you for recording this history, right? Because people sometimes don't have it recorded or they don't know, right? So, for example, during my affinity work that I did for aircraft maintenance, which is where I actually got my start in affinity work, I was trying to get all women to do certain activities, right? And one of them was like a competition. We were like, oh, we're going to have an all women's team go and do this competition. And so I asked the organizers who have been there since the inception of this competition, how many women of color how many all women's teams have there been that's gone through this? And they're like, oh, none. Like, wow, we're the first ones. That's amazing and sad and exciting and sad. But then 2 years later, another women's team comes through and they're like, we're the first ones. And we're like, whoa, no, actually, we're the first ones. And then, no, it gets worse, Ting Ting. And then another group was like, actually, we were the first ones 10 years ago. And I was like,
okay.
Wait, so the powers, I guess the lesson to take away here is the powers that be that run these huge organizations that don't actually give a crap about other histories, don't record, and they don't even pay attention. It goes back to giving a damn, right? They didn't give a damn enough to be like, wow, that's really cool. I'm going to log that in my brain that there was already that activity done. Obviously, they were not that impressed by it. So similarly with the SPI provider, like the AMGA, do they have stats on it? If they do, is it broken down by race? You know, do they put enough stock in that to be able to track that? Because I would hate to be like, I'm the first when I'm actually not, because I want to honor someone else's history in that. I'm okay with not being the first, but
right. I'm not definitely not the first provider of color, that's for sure.
Yeah. Who was the first?
That I don't know, but I do know that there are other provider of color.
I do know two of them here in Washington. Oh no, one's Oregon, one's Washington, but they're both men too.
And I'm also still not sure that I'm the first woman of color. So, because I just don't have the stats and I don't have the data. And I don't think they actually ask us to fill out any race.
Demographic stuff? Yeah.
Information. So they probably cannot be sure. You can't just read people's name and guess.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I do have a very Asian name.
Right.
Sometimes they also doesn't mean that I'm that race.
That's true.
So I don't really think there's an official record.
Yeah.
So in terms of history, unless we told them it's important, otherwise we might not really know.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And
it's something to be celebrated, right? Not to say, be like, oh, MJ, you're doing a bad job. You haven't had these certain demographics. It's just something to explore and celebrate sometimes, which would be a really nice thing. But yeah, I just feel like it's not given the weight that it should sometimes, which is what I feel like your podcast is also doing, is it's giving voice to those that haven't been able to share their stories or... Yeah.
And just like during the SPI course, I told the students that I think SPI is a very important job because SPI introduced climbing to a lot of first-time climbers.
Absolutely.
So that's like the image they would see.
Yeah.
So if the representation is a little, say, biased, so then that's probably their first impression, and which would not be beautiful. So it's kind of nice that, you know, if you want to become an SPI provider, and then the new SPI would see a representation of a different demographic, then I think it's just a beautiful thing. And then eventually we don't even care about who's first because there will be so many of us.
Yeah, that's the dream, right?
Yes.
Like the dream is not to have climbers of color. The dream is not to have affinity programs, because people are willing to have those conversations about conflict and acknowledge systems of oppression, etc. Right?
Yeah,
and be able to celebrate just wins.
So in terms of, say, guiding path, because you just mentioned that you like to teach people how to teach. So it makes sense to me that you want to be a SPI provider.
Yeah.
do you ever think about you want to be like guide? Like, which I meant of say, like for example, I'm a rock guide, and maybe a ski guy or the mountain guy or alpine guy or that type of thing. Yeah, because you certainly have your anchor job in this organization. It could be a little bit too much on the plate. I don't know. You think?
I think so. I mean, I've been offered jobs at other guiding companies, and I just don't relish the idea of guiding cisgender white males.
And you mentioned that you don't have the intention, not saying that you totally exclude the possibility, but you don't have the intention to teach non-affinity program.
No, I don't. I think part of it is protection for myself because, for example, in my job, it's 99% cisgender white men, right? And I'm not seen as competent a lot. I'm not seen as the person to go to, even though I feel like I go above and beyond to be like, have my stuff dialed in because I have to know it, right? People have said to me, oh, there's women in the industry and they're either really, really bad or they're really, really good. We're not allowed to be mediocre. There's not enough of us to have the allowance to be mediocre, which is really upsetting.
You mean that you either have to be exceptional, or you must as well just be hiding in the dark, you're saying?
Pretty much. Okay. Yeah, which is really unfortunate.
Actually, I never thought about that.
There's a whole nother conversation. There's a book, too, I can recommend after this, too.
Do you remember the title?
Oh, gosh.
Anyway.
It's The Legacy of the Mediocre White Male, I believe.
Legacy of Mediocre.
Yeah. So you already know what it's about, right? Yes, very good book. I can't remember the author off the top of my head. I believe they're in Seattle, too, but it's very good. But it does talk about how if you're a minority in a space, you're not allowed to be mediocre. Like, you're either just a total screw-up, apparently, if you're mediocre, or you have to be at 110%.
Then maybe can I be proud that maybe I'm exceptional?
Yeah, I mean, and it's good to be exceptional, right? But it can hinder a lot of risk taking for us as well.
Oh, that is true. Yes.
Yeah.
If you can put ego out of the line. Yes.
Yeah. And then it's hard to have those conversations too, where it's like, I messed up. Can I get some help? Right. So with that in mind,
it's nice to have some vulnerability.
Yes, absolutely. And it's hard to be vulnerable in those spaces. So I feel like I'd be leading more with ego if I guided outside of affinity spaces, because I'm already coming from a place of defense, and I already have to come from a place of defense in my own regular 9-to-5 job, which I love. Don't get me wrong. And I have people and allies that I do feel like I can depend on, but it's lonely. It's hard. It's difficult. And I have self-pity parties with cake, on Fridays sometimes. Don't we all? But if I was to do that in my guiding too, I think it would just be emotionally too much for me at this point in time. Not saying I'm totally closed off to it, but it's just emotionally draining for me some days, especially since, and I think I've posted about this on Instagram, the last 2 years whenever I've guided, I get drilled at the crag. At least I used to. This season hasn't been as bad. Maybe it's because I'm teaching less, but I'd always have these people come up to me and they want to know who I'm with, what my certs are. I'm serious. What I'm guiding, and I just feel like I'm not certain that they do that grill with other people. Yeah, and it was like almost every single time I was out guiding, it would be some other white guide, usually male. Actually, no, all male. And they just like question. And I think it's a number of things, right? I don't look like a guide. I'm actually a bigger bodied person, right? So I don't appear to be super, super climber, statuesque.
Why do they do that? What do they want to know?
It's credential checking is what they call it. They just I think they're curious. I think their biases may not allow them to stretch their mind as far as to be like, they're a guide. They're obviously teaching that what they're saying sounds competent and coherent, like they've taught it before. So curiosity, yeah, that's fine. But at the same time, I feel like you can overstep that boundary a little bit where it starts to get rude, where you're like, what are you really asking me?
Yeah, I'm curious. I don't know what their intent. I can assume. So.
I don't know. We can assume, and you can drive yourself crazy over it, which I have some days. But others, I'm just like, and I'm just tired, and I'm just going to either answer their questions and just try to stay cordial, because you are the guide on the trip. You have to have your crap together and be cordial to be able to share the space with other people. And maybe that's not the time to pick that battle.
Right.
Which can be emotionally difficult as well.
I do know that sometimes people will ask you credential and then ask you whether you... That's because the guiding space there is competitive.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, for example, there's some areas the permit is easy. Mm-hmm. So there would just be a lot of guys in the same space.
Yeah.
And then typically you want to work with other group, but then they also think that, well, are you like pirate guiding? So then
what is pirate guiding?
Means that you don't operate within your scope of practice.
Oh, interesting. So is it up to these
They can
people?
Report you.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So they're looking to report me?
Then
oh gosh,
then
that makes
they
it worse.
Maybe can eliminate the competition.
Oh wow, that's terrible.
But
that is terrible.
The thing, I certainly follow SOP and I understand that the reason behind it.
Yeah.
But there's pirate guiding going on because sometimes some areas, no matter how hard you try, you just can't get the permit.
Oh, yeah. Like Leavenworth.
And then, so there will be some clients that, say, for example, your longtime clients say, oh, yeah, Ting Ting, I really want to go climbing Yosemite. Say, can you take me there? I say, I can't, because if I take you there, I'm pirate guiding, because there's only one guiding service can operate there. And they don't let people guest guide. So even I'm willing to pay them, I can't, they won't say yes to me.
Wow. Okay.
So that's an ongoing thing that hopefully AMGA is working on at Washington, D.C. Access issue.
Yes. Yeah.
But as you can see, anything like that scale is going to take a long time.
Yes, absolutely.
So right now I just I just can't take you to Yosemite.
So if they're not following scope of practice, who are they reporting it to?
So the thing is, there's really no true
the AMGA police or what?
Something like that. So I don't actually know whether the AMGA can revoke your cert.
Yeah, I mean, what can they do?
So that
you technically don't need scope of practice for your own insurance, so you could still be
right. So right now the guiding space, because I got asked this question, I have to answer when I teach SPI. So I say, well, once you get to a certain level, then I don't have the answer. So then I have to talk to somebody who might know the answer.
Right. Yeah. Interesting.
So, but that's out there, because I've heard people being checked on their credentials. Say, why are you here? Do you have the permit? Can you operate here?
Goodness. Yeah. Wow.
So it might not because, say, your identity as a Black woman.
Yeah.
It could be anything. And then right now...
Yeah, the speculation will drive you nuts.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless you ask them outright.
Yeah. So if you are really curious, you just have to ask on the spot, why do you ask this question?
Okay.
Otherwise, because there's one SPI program I did in Red Rock, and then my participant... It's an all-women course.
Oh, yeah.
And then my participants feel like they've been watched by these two men.
Oh, gosh. Awkward.
And then... So I just said, why are you watching?
Yeah.
They say, oh, we are taking another AMG course. We're just curious about what this program is.
Okay.
And I was like, well, you're a little bit too close.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you just have to ask and tell them that maybe you should leave.
Yeah. No, that's a good call. Set those boundaries. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, because I do struggle with setting boundaries sometimes.
Yeah.
And I do think it comes from a place of survival where I'm like, oh, am I going to get in trouble for this? How much is too much to just be like, hey, you need to leave us alone? Because at the end of the day, the safety of the participants, of these people of color, ends with me.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And when I just start guiding, I feel the same way. I'm like working a lot in my head, but then I don't speak up. But then that what you just said, the responsibility of my participant made me just
Yeah.
like, you know what, I'm just gonna say something. Yeah, because my participant, they were even more worried than if I don't do something, then who's
Yeah.
gonna protect them?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it goes both ways. Like yourself, how much crap are you willing to take on
Right.
versus how much are you willing to dole out for your participants? And I'll be honest, I'm willing to dole out more crap on to protect my participants than myself. And that's a whole nother conversation too.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm on the same page. Sometimes, like, if it's just me, if me is the only person who is involved, then I might just drop the battle. I just say whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I have my students or participating in line, then there will be a different story. And sometimes, there's one time I regret I didn't stand out a little bit more. Yeah, and I still remember that incident. Not saying that I can go back in time to fix that, but it was a learning experience for me.
Right. You learn it, move on, take the valuable lesson with you. Sure.
So my experience is always, okay, I got a good reason, and usually taking that step is always worse for me so far. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry you had to go through those things.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's a little bit kind of taking away from you.
No, it's a sharing space.
Yes.
Definitely.
And I like to ask you right now, since this is episode 13, it's like a new page that I like to ask you like big questions is, looking back with your guiding work, even just a organization, because I think that's part of your guiding work.
Yeah.
And what's your most proud accomplishment or moment or stuff?
Yeah, I'd have to think long and hard about that, and I think I'm going to give a general answer.
Sure.
Seeing as how my role has kind of come to be rock team instructor, where I'm teaching, people how to teach, I like to watch the evolution of people's minds and skills.
Minds.
Can
you elaborate on
Yeah,
that?
so say you're teaching someone how to do the MMO, the Munter Mule overhand, right? And you're like, okay, you're going to do it in this very specific way. Sometimes it doesn't work that way. The way that I do it may not mesh with someone else's mind or learning style or skills, etc. It might be brand new to them, or maybe they're just still fumbling through it a little bit. So being able to see how I can change my teaching so that they can further understand it is really interesting to me. And so I feel a lot of joy and pride when I'm able to teach something to someone and they understand it, not in the way that I think they should be learning it, but in the way that makes sense to them, if that makes sense.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think as a good instructor, educator, or teacher that's something that we pay attention to.
Yes.
Yeah, because the ultimate result is we want them to get it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Mm-hmm.
And we're not all going to get it in the same way. And there's value in being able to teach things in different ways too. And there's also ego has to do with it a little bit, where their person's just like, if they're struggling, you can see the wheels turning. Sometimes it'll be self-talk is worse, as bad as, oh, I'm just really dumb, I can't get this. Where it might just be the way the information has been presented just needs to be tweaked a little bit for them to actually understand it. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't make you dumb. It just means that your brain works in a little bit of a different way. And being able to impart that wisdom upon newer guides coming in, I think, is very important. Not only for accessibility for people who are disabled, but even just the general population, because everyone is different, right? It takes more work and effort to be able to teach in different ways and be on your toes and change that. But I just really enjoy when the light bulb goes off and you're like, yes, you got it. You're still going to have to practice this, and that's okay. But I see that you understand it.
Awesome.
And you can take that and carry it on with you. And then to see them, translate it to bigger objectives and stuff, I really, really enjoy that. Yeah. I know that's a broad answer, but that's...
No, I think as a good teacher, that's always, you want to be proud of them.
Yes. Absolutely.
Great. That which also means that if you notice those moments, you adjust to it, you're a great teacher.
Oh, yeah, hopefully.
And how about what we've been talking about? Well, slightly over an hour now. So if, people sometimes listen to a podcast, like they might enter the space at different time frame and stuff. If you hoping that the audience just have like remember one thing from this episode, what do you think the biggest takeaway do you want people to take away?
I would say that it's all a process.
Oh, process.
Right? Seeing as how I am a mechanic and an educator of sorts, / guiding person, right? Everything's process. Like even what we just talked about, there's a certain process. You see an issue because someone's not getting it. You change the way that you need to approach this, right? Same thing for DEIJ. Process. You have made a mistake. You've offended someone. You've excluded someone, right? The next step is, like we talked about, trying to make some kind of amends with it, trying to learn from it, etc. It's all about process, and you can really take away a lot of lessons just by going through whatever process it is to get the outcome that you're trying to achieve. That's my mechanical brain thinking for sure.
Nice. I like the process.
I do too.
Definitely, you like to achieve a certain goal, but it's always the process that you remember the most.
Absolutely. That's where the learning and growing really hits home, right?
Yeah. I know the Climbers of Color is growing, and I can see it's gonna grow and grow. And definitely you say you volunteer a lot of time. So I bet that you still need like support, right? So what kind of support that you hope that you might, if somebody listening, you say, what kind of support you're hoping that people can offer?
Ooh, that's a good one. Well, I would like to first and foremost thank my partner for all the support and patience that he has, because there's a lot of times that I do neglect our relationship for Climbers of Color, which is my own personal choice and stuff that we have to work through, right? So thank you to him. But also, I don't know. I think personally for me, the biggest hurdle that I can think of right now is my multi-pitch instructor course. Right. I'm in this weird space where I'm in a position of power at Climbers of Color, right?
Okay.
But then at the same time, I'm also in a position where it's like I'm privileged with my income, but at the same time, multi-pitch instructor course is expensive.
Right now, can I ask you what's
$4,500.
For how many days?
I think it's 8 days.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
It's all the way in New Hampshire.
And then you have to travel.
I have to travel.
Yes.
I have to get lodging. I have to have food. All together, I'd say it's about $6,000. And
Did you apply for I think they have some scholarship.
I didn't get it.
Okay, sorry.
Apparently, being the first Black SPI provider possibly is not enough motivation to get a scholarship. Because I did put that in there, but that's okay. I'd like to thank Climbing for Change, because they did give me a grant for it. Yeah.
Yes.
And of course, Climbers of Color has also put a little bit of money in the pot too. But, I'm always open to, this sounds terrible because I do have a good anchor job, right? And I am privileged, but I'm always open to any kind of donations to go towards that, because I've asked outdoor brands, would you like to sponsor me for this? Would you like to help pay for the cost for what it is that I'm trying to achieve here? And came up empty-handed beyond those two organizations. So you can always Venmo me. I'll take it right now. But support for Climbers of Color in general. If you're a person of color, just be. Take that joy, take that time to just be yourself, your culture, whatever it is. Bring it into the outdoors. Have fun with it, right? Play around. If you are someone that's looking to be an ally, be it white or a person of color to other people of color, right? Process, learning, mistakes, taking that learning with you, right? Take it all in and just have some grace with yourself, but also strive for that change.
Wow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. And I know Climbers of Color's Instagram and website.
Yes.
So I'll put it on the show note. Anything, any link that you want to put in there?
There's one more. I also run a blog.
Okay.
It's called Rock Rose Blog. And that actually has a critical look at a lot of BIPOC policy and climbing, the intersection of all three whenever it comes across those things. And that's all free as well. But I like to put people over there. Like, my main Instagram is kind of like the good life, like climbing and everything that intersects with that. And should I put your personal Instagram? Yeah, sure. Oh, sure. Yeah. A Rose on the Rock. But then Rock Rose Blog is my opinion that comes out a little bit more, because everyone needs a little outlet for either their anger or the injustices that they see, and kind of analyzing these things, right? Is how I kind of deal with certain situations that I've come up against. But also, if you are a major organization, company, whatever, that has funds that you would like to give to Climbers of Color, you can go to climbersofcolor.org/donate. And we are a 501c3 nonprofit through the Mountaineers, of course, but it goes directly to us if you go to that webpage. And we're also open to donations for, initiatives like trying to get our own insurance, etc., and keeping these programs alive and well for bringing people of color into the outdoors and teaching people how to bring other people of color into the outdoors as well.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Crystal, for taking this time.
Thank you, Ting Ting.
Yeah,
what you're doing is very important.
First of all, best of luck for your multi-pitch instructor course.
Yes, thank you.
And then I think I will see you next summer.
I hope so.
Okay.
All right, thanks.